Mr. Andy Piper.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm just going to get this in order. Bear with me one moment. It keeps going forward. That's not what I wanted it to do. That's better. Excellent. Hello. Bonjour. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me here to Quebec. It's my first time here in Canada, actually, and I'm very honoured to be on the agenda with so many fantastic speakers. I've been very much enjoying the day so far, and sitting and quietly ticking off each of my key points as the other speakers made them for me. So I'm hoping to be able to draw together some of the conversations that have already been put forward today. So I'm from IBM Software Group. I'm from our lab in Hursley, which is a small village near the city of Winchester in England. Very beautiful lab, which is based around an old country house. My day job is actually working with our WebSphere software, which is middleware effectively for transaction processing and business process management. I won't bore you with the details because that's not really what you came here to hear about today. It says up on the slide, I'm also known as a social bridge builder, so I'm basically a techie. I'm basically into technology. I'm a consultant, an IT specialist in IBM terms. But about 5 years ago, I started getting involved quite heavily within some community work within IBM. And when I say community work, I mean that I started a blog. I was out working with our customers on a day-to-day basis, and was a bit bored and lonely, quite honestly, not because I didn't like my customers, but because I was cut off from the rest of the company. So I started a blog on our internal social network, and since then I've kind of become something of a spokesperson and toured the conference circuit on some of these topics and how we really integrate some of these concepts of social networks within an enterprise. So we've just had a very interesting and thought-provoking discussion about privacy and how privacy affects us really online as individuals in public. But we're going to think a little bit about what's going on inside large organizations or what I'm terming here enterprises. I believe that 2 years ago my colleague Chuck Hamilton was here speaking about some of the stuff that IBM's been doing with virtual worlds, and I'll speak about that as well. And Richard McCormack from Fujitsu earlier mentioned his 6 C's. One of them was consumerization, I think. I'm terming the same thing convergence, really. So the 3 trends I'd like to quickly talk through in the next half an hour are the fact that everything's social these days and how we as people within large companies can respond to that. We'll talk a little bit about virtual environments and virtual worlds, 3D internet, and also this concept that's also already come up today of pervasive connectivity. Before I go into those, I just want to mention I've been on Twitter today. I know that a few other people at the conference have been. I haven't seen lots of people on there. A few of us have been using this hashtag. So if you are on Twitter and you're talking about any of the discussions here, then if you use that hashtag, then if people search for discussions about the conference, then they'll all be grouped together. So I encourage you to do that. I also just generally encourage people to use Twitter for these kind of conferences. The last time I was on a stage talking to an audience of this size, I actually had on one side my slides and on the other side a live Twitter stream of what people were thinking about me. But unlike this event, I couldn't actually see behind me, so that was a little bit more intimidating. Actually, it was also really cool because at lunchtime, somebody else, JP, came up to say hi. He'd seen me on Twitter earlier. I tried to keep my picture fairly consistent with what I actually look like, so it's kind of good for networking as well. So just a very quick plug for that particular social network. So social everything. I also don't like the term social media because I think social media has become such a catch-all. The South by Southwest conference last month in Austin, Texas, I believe people started to get that feeling as well. I wasn't there myself, but the feedback I was hearing from the conference was very much that this term social media has become overloaded. Because what's social? Well, people, humans, person-centric computing, human-centric computing that Richard was talking about before. Humans are naturally social, and I think this is one of the reasons why we've gradually made our network, our internet, our joint online cloud much more social. We've made the tools, we've made the websites behave in a much more desktop-like, natural way. Because we like to talk to one another, we like to communicate. Events are social. At the moment in the UK, there's a parliamentary proceeding going on. They've just called an election, so there's a load of stuff being rushed through at the end of the session. I've been over here in Canada, and I've been following one of the particular pieces of legislation with great interest, because it's to do with the digital economy in the UK, so it's got a bunch of IT-related measures in there. And I've been following it on Twitter, and I've been getting involved in that conversation on Twitter. And one of the gentlemen this morning, Mr. LaFrance, was mentioning that he felt that one thing that some of these social tools have moved away from is this concept of mediated conversations. And whilst I accept that to some extent, that depends on me accepting the mediation and me trusting and believing that that's a medium level of discussion. The group of people that I follow on Twitter includes my friends, it includes people I'm interested in, it does include some journalists. So I am getting some level of mediated discussion, but I'm also getting peer group conversation around that topic. And the same thing applies, by the way, inside the enterprise. So if I'm not at a conference that my colleagues are at, I will follow the hashtag. So IBM has conferences, Software Group has conferences around the world every year. I don't get to go to all of them, much to my dismay. But I'm able to follow the event. And that's another reason why, I would encourage you, if you are on Twitter, to talk about this event, because it's good publicity for the event, especially if you're enjoying it. It's a good way of actually drawing in outside opinions and actually socializing the event. And really, this diagram, it's too small to read, and this has evolved over the last few years, the conversation prison, but you can go and find it at theconversationprison.com, really illustrates how in every dimension, in every slice of online life, be it events, photography, what else do we have up here? Micromedia, Twitter, live streaming, SMS, all kinds of things. There is a social network which plugs into that technology. So everything is becoming social. So probably enterprises need to think about this. If we look at the growth of some of the social networks in particular, this is some figures I took from Nielsen last year. I couldn't find anything, actually. I was surprised because this was last February, and I thought maybe they would have done a refresh of this research this year. So I apologize, I couldn't actually find any more up-to-date numbers. But you'll find that where Facebook and Twitter are growing most, and somebody tweeted this morning that maybe the reason that people weren't using Twitter from this conference was an age thing. I'm fundamentally don't believe in that idea. I did a presentation last October, I think, in London, talking about the fact that I don't believe in this so-called age gap that exists. I do agree that youngsters coming through into the corporate system, if such a thing exists, and actually that scares me as well. Should we even think about a corporate system, or should we try and enable young people to really reach their potentials, rather than locking them within corporate walls? But it's a behavioural thing, and I think that youngsters typically are more digitally enabled, but fundamentally anyone can get involved in these spaces, and that's why, for example, my mother, who's in her 60s, is on Facebook, and she's enjoying it, and she's communicating with the rest of the family, and she's getting value from it. So it's not very surprising, and by the way, I don't really have lots of pictures of IBM products or what IBM's doing. It's absolutely not here for that. I'm here to talk about trends. But I will just mention that it's unsurprising that IBM and a company of 400,000 people, give or take, has embraced these things, because it's really enabled us to work much more effectively and efficiently. And in fact, I walked into our Montreal office yesterday. If you visit IBM in Montreal, just be aware there are 2 buildings on René Lévesque, because I walked into the wrong one. And immediately my colleagues recognised me. We've got a very rich employee directory with profiles. People can immediately find my internal blog, my internal microblog, which is very similar to Twitter. It's built on our platform Lotus Connections, which Jeff mentioned from RIM, because you can access that on one of these or one of his company's devices. And these things are enabling us to work much more effectively. So that's social everything, social networks, social software, social media, whatever you like to call it. Let's have a quick look then at what's been happening with virtual worlds. And IBM's been in Second Life for a number of years. I believe I was introduced as belonging to our virtual universe community. That's a community of people that's really grown up organically within the company. No one individual, no one VP came along and said, right, we're going to have this virtual worlds community now. Just a bunch of us started experimenting and finding value in having meetings in these virtual spaces. And then we found, well, actually, you know, there are some corporate issues here, because if we use Second Life as an example, we're using another company's servers. They're in San Francisco. They don't belong to IBM. We can't talk confidentially. So what we would typically have would be an IBM conference call on top of the meeting so that we could speak confidentially. And then after a while, we worked with Linden Lab, who are the people that invented Second Life, and they now have an enterprise offering which they will enable people to buy and host their own virtual environments. We started off experimenting with this, I think, in about 2006. I've got colleagues on there who have their houses online. My colleague Andy Stanford Clark, his house is on Twitter as well, by the way. Andy_house. His house is twittering its energy usage and when the front gate opens. He's been on lots of TV programs in the UK, but his house is also in Second Life, and you can see a model of it, and he can see when the front gate is actually opened. He's Mr. Propellerhead techie. He's instrumented everything. And I was tweeting earlier about the robot, the Lego robot that was solving the Rubik Cube. And there was somebody responding to me saying that she's going to be building something similar in Second Life soon. So it's a really good environment for simulation. It's had some bad press recently, mainly that it had this massive growth and it seemed to slow down very fast. What we've also done at IBM is we've integrated virtual worlds with our same-time meeting technology from Lotus. So this is a screenshot from our same-time 3D product. And what you can see at the back there is a brainstorming board where people can meet up from all over the world. And I've worked on one of these projects where we've literally had participants from India and the UK and the US. And everybody can meet up, they can have a conversation, they can speak using voice as well. They can start putting notes up on a virtual board. And then we've got techniques to enable us to actually organize those notes. So we found that very successful as well. Another thing we've done, we've learned from our experiences with virtual worlds that Chuck will have been here talking about a couple of years ago. And we've never just used the one platform, we've always been trying out different ones. So another thing we've been trying out is using games for teaching. So last May at our Impact conference in Las Vegas, I know it was last May because there's another one coming up this year, so I'm traveling again in a month's time. We launched Innovate, which is a game for teaching business process management. And we found lots of interest, particularly from universities or from graduate students who are beginning to go into the workplace to learn about these kind of things. But we're finding that the gaming experience and the gaming interface is becoming a lot more natural. Interesting word I came across a couple of days ago was this idea of gamification. So there's a company called Unity who build a product. It's a kind of a middleware product for building games, or it's a game engine really, called Unity 3D, which runs in a web browser. So it's very, very low footprint. Unfortunately, it doesn't run on Linux, which is my other laptop has on it. But you can get Unity for the iPhone and all kinds of other platforms. He's talking about increasingly the idea that games technology is moving into domains that haven't traditionally been just for gaming. And in case you missed it as well, last year was kind of the year that this idea of augmented reality arrived. So this is a screenshot from my iPhone. That's actually a very bad picture, just badly lit picture of inside my office in the UK. And we're using the LAYAR engine. One of my colleagues from our emerging technologies team, Dale Lane, has just played around a bit. He's gone around and GPS tagged various areas of our lab. And those blobs actually refer to different areas of the lab. So we've got the garden, which is on the other side of the site, and then we've got security and the T-bar and the canteen and various other things marked. So if, for example, a visitor was to come to our lab, it's a large site. It took me about 3 months to work out how to get from A to B. But we can start to use technology that's coming into the lab through the consumer channel, and the concepts, this augmented reality, the technology becoming much richer, to enable people just to navigate their way around the site a lot more easily. So this has really been driven by the growth of some of these games engines into the middleware domain as well, I think. So my final theme, really, before I move on briefly to talk about some of the impacts on the enterprise more directly, is connectivity everywhere. And this is really what Jim Carroll talked about this morning when he mentioned pervasive connectivity. And in fact, these wires that we've been used to are going away, but the fact is that broadband is reaching really quite high levels of penetration in the developed world. That's better. We talked about cloud computing today already, and I think it was Richard who mentioned that he felt that the clouds, whilst companies had private clouds as well as people using the public cloud, by which you might understand, you might see Amazon or Google, he was suggesting that he feels that gradually there's going to be the shift towards the public, I beg your pardon. Well, I think that's an interesting idea. I think certainly, I think his slide had a kind of a gradual decrease in the percentage of private cloud. I don't necessarily see that happening. I think that it will decrease, but I don't think it will go away. I think there's a very good reason for companies and enterprises to have private clouds. Number one, it's still a very big step, especially for large organizations. I think startups and smaller organizations who are culturally and naturally potentially more agile can quite easily adopt the public cloud and become comfortable with it. I think larger organizations, traditional organizations with special requirements, governments, defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, companies with intellectual property to protect, have very good reasons to continue to build private systems, but that may well be on a cloud-like infrastructure. So, tiny bit of IBM sales, to speak. We've got some products and appliances which help organizations to deploy private clouds. Something called Cloudburst, which you can go away and read about. Equally, IBM's been enabling customers to try out our software on the Amazon cloud. So, in my hotel room the other night, I was trying out one of the products that I'm strategically involved with on the Amazon cloud. It's also a very good proving ground for users within a company to become comfortable with the concept of the cloud and the concept as well of social networks. If you have your own internal social network, it enables people to become more comfortable with that level of potential sharing. A very, very good book I read a number of years ago. In fact, I think it was published in 2006 by Adam Greenfield. It's this book called Everywhere. And he talked about this idea of ubiquitous computing, or UbiComp, with the idea that computing power is becoming embedded in everything. And this is something that I think we've really seen accelerating in the last couple of years. It's why IBM's talking about what we call the smarter planet, and I believe that's one of the themes of this conference as well. The idea that increasingly devices are getting microprocessors, getting intelligence embedded within them, but ultimately we need to have cities, for example, which are able to respond to those devices, or other devices that are able to be responding in a much more location-aware, contextually aware way. And by the way, the other thing that Adam Greenfield talks about, because I believe it was either the year after or the year that Minority Report, the film, came out at the cinema, and I've recently seen Avatar, which has got some similar concepts. In Minority Report, Tom Cruise is operating this computer system which has got kind of this curved holographic screen and moving stuff around, and it's all gesture-based. Well, this stuff is really becoming real, and at the time, that's only 5 years ago, that stuff looked really still quite futuristic, but, hey, this iPad thing's come out in the US last week, and we're getting down to very, very thin levels of screen. We talked earlier about the very rapid turnover of consumer technology. We're seeing gesture-based computing. We're going to see other things like Microsoft's rumoured Project Natal, which is actually a controllerless system for gaming, coming out at the end of the year. I'll talk more about that in just a few moments. So, having gone through those themes, what impacts can we see, and what's driving those into the enterprise? Well, a chap called Frank Kenny, who used to be with Gartner last year, he's left Gartner now, he started using this term prosumer, by which he meant professional consumers, and really this term is overloaded. I understand the term, I'm a photographer, I understand the term prosumer to mean something slightly different. It's more about, a professional piece of equipment being available to me as a consumer at a consumer price point. But he was talking about this as a term for people who take their own equipment to work. And now I really kind of see this as just being self-confident technology adopters, people like myself, if I'm being entirely boastful. I expect to be able to use my own devices at work. And I'm very lucky that actually my company enables me to. And these are the people, these individuals who are going down this road, are the ones who are driving the consumer technologies into your businesses. And if your infrastructure isn't, and your policies aren't in place to support that, then they're just going to go around you. So, my office in our lab in Hursley, I have this laptop, which belongs to me. It's not an IBM one. I have one that the company's provided me. I have a netbook. I have this, and I use whichever device is most convenient to me as I walk around the lab. And I'd love to have an iPad if anybody's got one. No? Okay. Never mind, I'll wait for them to come out in the UK. But I expect to be able to interact with services like email, like my file storage, like my photographs, like my movies, which I mustn't be watching in the office, obviously. But more important, I expect to be able to be interacting with all of this stuff in the way that I do at home, and when I want to. Now, I've actually been on vacation here in Montreal the last few days, but I popped into the office yesterday to meet some colleagues, stayed in the office, hooked up to the network there was no problem. I work for the same company, but I didn't have an IBM device with me, but there's no issue. It's all, we've got policies in place to enable me to be productive, to knock off a few emails while I'm in the office and then go back to my daily life. I want to be able to work as and when appropriate. Talking of the iPad, amazing how the press changed its tune, actually. Back in January, gentleman Peter Judge here was saying, oh no, this iPad thing's going to be no big deal. Most companies aren't going to be able to allow them on the network. You're going to struggle to justify the expense and so on. Merely days before it was launched, the tune has completely changed. 2 months later, people are just going to start using them. If they find them convenient, if they find them a useful form factor, if they find the functionality that they need is there, then people will use them. And it's going to become increasingly difficult for enterprises to actually police exactly what devices come onto their networks. So, about 6 months ago, no, I beg your pardon, this was last June, so longer than 6 months ago, I gave a presentation in our lab to a group of MBA students who'd come in from one of our partner universities in the UK. And I talked to them about how they might want to collaborate when they come to work with us or with another enterprise. And I hope everybody can read this reasonably well. I asked them 3 questions to start off. It was just after lunch, and I wanted to kind of get them thinking. So I said, what kinds of tools do you think we use today as a company of 400,000 people globally? And they said, well, Skype, obviously, and online meetings. And you know, I've been with IBM for 9 years, and yes, we do have voice over IP internally, and yes, we do have online meetings, but we're not using Skype. And you know, they mentioned email and phone, which are still very, very common, right down the end of their list, which I found a little bit surprising. So I said, okay, what would you like to use when you come to work with us or with another company? And they said, well, Facebook. And I said, well, okay, Facebook, that's kind of out there on the internet. Don't you think that's a bit strange? Is that really the way that you think you'd be communicating with your colleagues at work? And they said, well, obviously, you know, you'd have something internally. And I thought, well, you guys are geniuses, because we've got just that. We've got something called Lotus Connections. I've got a profile page, people can comment. I can build my network that way. But, you know, that generation of people, Generation Y or Generation V or whatever the current terminology for them is, really does expect the tools just to be in place and for things to be this easy. So I'm just going to very quickly round up with some other thoughts about what enterprises need to do. We talked about gaming. The lady in the top corner here, using a Wii controller. Again, gesture-based technology is becoming increasingly important. I think enterprises are going to need in the near future to start accommodating that. They're already having to deal with touch interfaces. So I'm already telling people in my lab, you need to start making your products more usable with a web interface on my iPhone or iPad or whatever device I have. I think voice and gesture control are going to become increasingly important as well. And in terms of policy, rather than blocking or trying to control what employees do, I think we as enterprises and large companies and medium-sized companies and small companies need to become more trusting of a socially technology-savvy and aware workforce who have grown up with this stuff. They're not all incompetent, and they're not all buffoons, and they don't, you know, they're not going to necessarily share all your corporate secrets with their friends on Facebook, as long as you educate them. And those who are coming through are not nearly as naive as you may think. I think we need, as I think David Robertson mentioned earlier, we need to be able to blur the boundaries of our organisation, be able to take more risks, to crowdsource, to work more readily with partners, because I think that's really where a lot of innovation is coming from. And really also to consider transparency in our communications with our workforce and set up frameworks, help them, work with them to set up frameworks under which everyone's going to operate. So IBM's got something called the Social Computing Guidelines. They're not a secret. Anybody in this audience can go onto our website now. If you Google them, in fact, you'll find them. They're just a set of guidelines. They're not, you know, they're not the law. They're not strict rules. They're just something that we've all signed up to as IBMers that we're all going to follow in our interactions online. So everything's social. The web has become social as a result of people themselves being social. Technology has followed form and function. And I think businesses really also need to adapt to that social technology in the next phase. So thank you very much. Feel free to connect with me online, and if you come along and have a look at my website later on today, I'll add some further reading and reference material for you to check out. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Andy. C'est l'heure de la pause.